Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of Digging for Truth. I'm your co-host, Henry Smith, and our program is sponsored by the Associates for Biblical Research. On our show, we talk very much about archaeological discoveries that illuminate and show the reliability of the Scriptures. Today, I have a very special guest joining us, all the way from Amman, Jordan, Mr. Joel Kramer from SourceFlix Ministries. Joel, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you on the program all the way from a third of the way around the world. You've been friends with the ABR ministry for a long time, and we're going to talk about the exciting world of archaeology. We're going to get to a particular artifact that we want to share with the audience. That's awesome. But before we do that, I'd like you to introduce yourself a little bit to the audience. Tell them about what you do, why it's important, the calling on your life and your family's life as you're there over in the Holy Land, the extended Holy Land in Jordan.
I lived in Israel for 10 years, and then have lived in Jordan for 2 years. And so many years ago, living in Israel, I did a film with Dr. Bryant Wood, and we got to be good friends. And he's the one that inspired me also to go on to study archaeology. So I went and studied archaeology in Jerusalem and got a master's degree in archaeology.
Yeah, that's tremendous. And now, if I recall, that sort of happened in the providence of God. If I remember right, you didn't go to Israel to get an archaeology degree, is that right? But that's kind of what happened, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Very, very fascinating, the direction that God leads our lives. But now that you have this degree, you learned, by living in Israel, you learned a great deal about what the archaeologists say, what the evidence is, and so on.
Yeah, I spent almost 10 years studying archaeology there and being active in many different digs. And so, yeah, I got quite familiar with it and continue to do work in archaeology as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so we can call you an archaeologist. You didn't intend to go to Israel to become one, but you are an archaeologist. And we're excited to have you here, Joel. It's really great to have you on the show. Now, we decided we could talk about thousands of different artifacts. I mean, there's so much to talk about as it relates to the Bible. You mentioned Jericho. That's another whole subject in and of itself. But we're going to talk about this inscription in the Sudan. It's one inscription. We've talked about it on our show briefly before, but you're going to really share with us today the importance of this inscription. I'll let you set the stage for the audience of what it is. Let's set that up a little bit. So go ahead.
Well, there's actually two inscriptions that are very significant. They're both located in the country of Sudan. In ancient times, that was part of Egypt, and one of them was found first in a site called Amara West when they were excavating a temple built by Ramses II, and he listed out his foreign enemies, and one of those was an inscription that translates the Nomads of Yahweh, and then that was in the late 30s. Then later in the late 50s, they excavated another site not too far away from Amara West called Soleb, and they were excavating there, and they found a list of foreign enemies to the pharaoh Amenhotep III, and one of his enemies also was translated the Nomads of Yahweh. And so this Soleb inscription, and I want to emphasize this, there are many inscriptions that have been found through archaeology that mention the name of the God of Israel, Yahweh.
Yes.
But this Soleb inscription is very important because it is the oldest inscription that has been found to date mentioning the name of the God of Israel.
So the area of modern Sudan was under control of the ancient pharaohs. And so this inscription was found in the 1930s. When they started deciphering it back then, the archaeologists, did they recognize the importance of it, Joel? And what kind of response was there back then, or was it tepid?
Well, yeah, there was. It was understood to be very important, mentioning the name of the God of Israel. However, there never has really been a controversy on what these inscriptions say. That they mention the name Yahweh has, in all of the translations that have been done, they agree that's what it says.
Yeah.
Where the controversy has been is scholars have been reluctant to attribute who the nomads of Yahweh are in regards to them being Israel. So, these are the Kenites and these are the Edomites. These are anybody but the Israelites, which is really ridiculous because in the Old Testament, of course, the name Yahweh appears 6,823 times. And so maybe that's the nomads of Yahweh. And the reason why they are reluctant to do that is because it throws a monkey wrench in many theories that are out there.
Yeah, about the development of Israel, where they came from, and
Exactly.
those kinds of things. Now let's talk about the date real briefly. As we set up, we got about a minute and a half here. Let's talk about the date and the sort of context of that, and then we'll build on that in our next segment.
Okay, so the inscription itself dates to the end of the 15th century BC, and of course, give or take 10, 20 years based on how Egyptian chronology kind of shifts back and forth, but generally to the end of the 15th century BC, to the time of Amenhotep III, and it's one of his northern enemies. So we also know that it's an enemy somewhere to the north of Egypt, and so it's very early. We're talking about the same half century that Moses lived in. We're not talking long after the death of Moses that Amenhotep III put this foreign enemy inscription on his temple.
Excellent. So we see a recognition by a foreign power of this particular group of people. And we'll talk more about the significance of the Bedouin, right? They call them the Bedouin or the nomads, right? Next segment, we'll talk more about that. Well, why is that important? But here we have this recognition by this foreign power, and we find it again of the Israelite God. It's so amazing. It's in the Moabite stone too, which we've talked about on this program numerous times. The name Yahweh, and in other inscriptions as well.
Absolutely. There's a whole string of inscriptions mentioning the name Yahweh. The Soleb inscription is the oldest.
Yeah, that's really tremendous. So, Joel, let's build a little bit. Sometimes we as the church, when we're doing this kind of scholarship, sometimes we can be accused of fudging the information or trying to, make it into apologetics. We're just trying to defend the faith and justify the Christian faith. But you have a great quote from a secular scholar that I'd like you to share with the audience about this inscription. Go ahead with that.
Yeah, this is from Donald Redford. This is how I learned about this inscription. I was reading his book, Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times, and I came across this quote. He says this, talking again about this Soleb inscription. He says, "For half a century it has been generally admitted that we have here the Tetragrammaton, the name of the Israelite God Yahweh, and if this be the case," and listen to what he says here, "as it undoubtedly is, the passage constitutes a most precious indication of the whereabouts." Now here's the date of the inscription. "During the late 15th century BC of the enclave revering this God." And so I think it is important to emphasize that this is an agreed upon inscription, this find, and the translation of it is not controversial. It's not me and you saying this is what this inscription says. This is what secular scholarship, how it's translated through secular scholarship. This is the date assigned to it from secular scholarship, the end of the 15th century BC, which, by the way, is the biblical date for the conquest.
Yeah. In a previous set of episodes with Dr. Stripling, we've had roundtable discussions about the date of the Exodus, and those have been aired, and people can draw upon those to see how we've made that argument. And this inscription fits well with that. Now, it's interesting. I was thinking, I guess twofold. Maybe you could explain how the secular scholars try to sort of explain this away, not the fact that it says Yahweh, but what their explanation is. And then if you could talk about, this idea of these nomads, how that fits the Bible, like just expand on that a little bit.
Sure.
So go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, the way that secular scholarship does not believe that in the end of the 15th century BC that the Israelites existed. And so,
Right.
and they, of course, believe that the Bible was written much later. And so, if the Bible was written later, then why do we have this group of nomads worshiping Yahweh running around in the late 15th century? It's a real problem. And so what they do is they say, well, this isn't talking about the Israelites. This is talking about the Kenites or the Edomites. And then later, when Israel comes into existence, then they borrow the name of their God, Yahweh. Well, of course, if you have the biblical people that are in the Bible, the Edomites and the Kenites around in the 15th century, then why not the Israelites, who the Bible also says are around in the 15th century? So it just doesn't work. Their arguments don't work, and they're just trying to cling to these old theories that really fall apart with evidence like this, such as the documentary hypothesis and these kinds of theories. And it's also a problem, as you brought up, for those who believe in a late date for the conquest in the mid 13th century BC, because if you have the conquest happening in, say, 1250 or 1230 BC, then again, why do we have this group of nomads who are worshiping Yahweh, like the Bible says, running around in the end of the 15th century BC? And yes, this word that is translated from Egyptian as nomads is shazu, which means nomads. It's people, as you said, like the Bedouin that we see today running around. And so what if you think about Amenhotep III, who is identifying his enemies, and he has to identify the Israelites whom we're reading about in the book of Exodus at this time. What better way to describe them, identify them? You can't identify them as a nation. They're not a nation yet. You can't identify them as a city. They don't live in cities. They're nomads. So how does he identify them? He identifies them by the name of the God that they worship. And what better way to describe the people we're reading about in the Bible who are wandering around in the wilderness, following a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, who are following their God Yahweh. It's perfect. And there is no evidence. There is no inscriptions. There's no evidence at all that the Edomites or the Kenites or anybody else worshiped the God Yahweh. Maybe individuals did, but as far as nations go, whereas even as the quote that we just read says, this name that's found is the name of the God of Israel.
Yeah, it fits so well. It's almost too good to be true. You know what I mean? And that's part of the problem I think the secular scholars have. Now, they're influenced by these other models. You mentioned the documentary hypothesis. I'll mention to our audience real quick. This is the idea that the biblical texts have been written centuries after the events they record. So, and of course, we would always argue, well, how did they get all this stuff right if they wrote it centuries later? There's no way they could do that. And so these discoveries really refute this old theory that just won't die. It just will not die in biblical scholarship. So I add that thought. The other part of it is the other name ring that's there mentions Ashkelon, and it shows you the difference between that, right? It's naming a place, a city.
Right.
Just talk about that a little bit in contrast to the nomad idea. You got about 45 seconds.
Yeah, if your enemy is a city-state, then it's easy to identify them just by giving the name of the city. But again, with nomads who are moving around in tents and don't live anywhere in particular, then how are you going to identify them? And so the best way to identify them, and actually the way that they are identified both by Ramses II in this other inscription in Amara West, and in the Soleb inscription by Amenhotep III, is to identify them by a more important name than the name Israel, by the name that they of the God that they worship, which the name of the God that they worship is their identity.
Yes,
and that's why Moses asks God for his name. If you're going to make us your people and free us from our slavery, then what's your name? Because your name will be our identity.
Yeah, that's really tremendous. And it also builds on the Exodus events itself. The Pharaoh is always identifying his catastrophe with this God Yahweh. And there's not a land, there's a people, yes, but it's the Lord, Yahweh, who brings about judgment upon the Pharaoh. Joel, thank you so much for sharing all of that about this awesome inscription. I think people really need to know about it. I think it vindicates our view of the scriptures and really goes against all of these sort of unbelieving theories about the development of the Bible and the history of the people of Israel. But what I'd like to do is turn here a little bit and talk about, well, how did you go and study this inscription? How did you found out about it through Redford, who we quoted earlier, but tell the audience about this excursion that you went on. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, when I started researching the inscription for myself, I found very little information about it, and so it became important for me, in order to understand these inscriptions better, to actually go to the Sudan. And it's a problem if you're living in Israel to travel to the Sudan.
Yes.
But anyways, I was able to go there. I was able to find a driver with a 4-wheel drive vehicle, because it was both on and off road. And I spent a couple of weeks traveling in the Sudan and across the Sahara Desert, going through many, many checkpoints and sleeping on the ground. And anyways, it was quite a trip, and not a very comfortable trip. But I spent over 5 days at the Soleb Temple, photographing every inch of it and just really studying it. And so for me personally, that's why I moved over to Israel, and now Jordan is, for me, really to understand something, I got to go there. I got to see it. I got to put it in its context. And so that was really what was behind the trip to Sudan.
Yeah, that's tremendous, and of course the Lord was with you definitively. Sudan is there's some instability there politically, and it's a predominantly Muslim country. So you were coming from Israel, so that your sense of adventures there, I admire you. But of course the Lord is protecting you through all that too. Quite an experience, huh?
Yes, it was absolutely, but definitely worth it too. And it was a little disappointing at the Amara West site. I've been talking about how they reburied that temple, so you can't really see the inscriptions there. The good thing is those inscriptions are protected because they were reburied after excavations. But at Soleb, you can see all the inscriptions, including this one that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's excellent. As we have the show going on, we'll be showing photographs of the inscriptions so people can see. So let's talk a little bit, Joel. You did this wonderful video about this inscription, and we're gonna give that information to our audience so they could go watch it. One of the things that you did in there in the video I thought was really tremendous, and I'd like you to talk about this. We're talking about archaeology, of course, the Bible, the reliability of the scriptures, but what we want to do is point people to the God who reveals himself in the scriptures. And in that video, you talk about the name Yahweh and his enduring nature. And maybe you could just take it from there and just sort of build upon that and go. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Well, the key is Exodus 3, where Moses asks God for his name. And of course, he says, I am who I am. And that has more to do with what God's name means. But his name is Yahweh. And
yes.
So he's given his name Yahweh. And then it says in Exodus 3:15, it says, God says, this is my name forever, the name that I shall be called from generation to generation. And so that gives a time element. That means that God is going to be called by the name Yahweh through all generations and through history. And so really the question is there archaeological evidence for that God has been called by the name Yahweh from this time, Exodus 3, on down until today? And the answer is clearly yes, because of these many, many inscriptions that have been found. We mentioned two, one from about 1400 BC at Soleb, one from Amara West, about 1300 BC. You mentioned the Moabite stone, which is the 9th century BC, that mentions the name Yahweh. We have the silver amulets from Jerusalem, 6th century BC, and the Lachish letters, and I could go on and on and on.
Yes.
Down to the Dead Sea Scrolls that mention the name Yahweh over and over again. So we have all these archaeological finds from all these inscriptions that cover from generation to generation proving that God has indeed been known and called by the name Yahweh down through time. This is very much in contrast to the gods of the other nations who have disappeared over time. Where do people get together and worship Moloch, the god of Canaan? Where do they get together and worship the gods of the Philistines or the Ammonites or the Moabites or the Edomites? They're all gone. They've all disappeared through history because the people who believed in them have become extinct, and with them their belief in these false gods. Whereas the reason that there are still people, including ourselves, that worship Yahweh today in the world is because he's real. He's able to save his people again and again. And so that time element is key in understanding what is true and what is false. And the true God is obvious when you give it the test of time like that.
Yeah, a inscription is 3,400 and some odd years old, and here we are proclaiming his name today. Now we find his name in the name of Yeshua.
Absolutely.
Yahweh,
Absolutely.
Yahweh saves, right? Joel, we got about 30 seconds to finish up. What was the final thing you'd like to say about this inscription and the name Yahweh being found in there?
Well, it's really, as you pointed out, it's really not about the archaeology itself. It's archaeology. The archaeology is just it's just one of the things that show how awesome the God that we worship is, and how enduring he is, and how real his salvation is.
Yes.
And so it's just it's beyond our comprehension.
It is.
Just as his creation is. And so we just, it's one of those things to celebrate and to marvel how his realness has left all this evidence behind that that we can now use to try to persuade others to believe in him.
Amen to that. Joel, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, friends, for joining us. We pray that you will turn your heart to Yahweh. Have a great day.